starting to get on from various places that we do have interpretation for today's session. So if you can go to the globe at the bottom of your screen and click on the interpretation globe and either pick English or Spanish. And maybe now, Kathy or Ruby, could you repeat that for me in Spanish?
Creo que Ana Sofía está en la línea español, ¿verdad? Pero la idea es hacer clic en el icono del globo y escoger el idioma inglés o español. Gracias.
Excellent. So then we'll wait for all of our folks to join us as we get closer to 8 o'clock. So it's lovely to see all of you, and in some cases see in one box, we've got a lot of folks who are joining us from up at the Convent of Mercy with Sue and in the Philippines. So thank you everyone for spending part of your evening with us.
Authorities considered him armed and dangerous, saying he's threatened.
Also, Robin and I will do this during the program, but many of you from Sisters of Mercy and also the Interreligious Task Force played a role in helping with this 10-year fight in El Salvador. So thank you so much for all that you did and you share in the victories.
Just a reminder for folks, if you could mute yourselves as you join, so that we can be sure to eliminate some of the background noise. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, welcome to everyone who's joining us. We'll get started in just a little bit, but just wanted to say welcome. And this program is being offered in English and Spanish, and just wanted to ask folks to go ahead and click on the globe that's at the bottom of your screen and click Spanish or English based on what your personal language needs are.
Gracias.
Getting worse and worse. We talk about how it's getting worse, but we're not talking about how we can de-escalate the issue. And
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie Conley, and I am the Institute Justice Team Director for the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. And I would like to welcome you all to our program this evening. And thank you all very much for coming to spend part of your evening with us. I can tell just by looking at the boxes that I see across my screen that we really do have people from all corners of the world who are coming out to listen to our wonderful speakers share the story of their book. So a couple logistic things just to get us started, and then I'll be happy to introduce John and Robin, who will lead our program today. First, if you have not yet clicked at the bottom of your screen the interpretation to enable interpretation in English or Spanish, please do so. Because there is going to be the opportunity to engage as participants as well as listening to our speakers. We would like to ask everyone, whether you are listening or have English needs or Spanish needs, to click that here. And now I'll ask one of our interpreters to say that in Spanish to make sure that the information is conveyed.
Les recordamos que ahora es el momento de escoger su idioma. Pueden escoger inglés o español para participar en el idioma de su preferencia. Se puede escoger el icono del globo terráqueo que está en la parte inferior de la pantalla, hacer clic ahí y escoger inglés o español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. So, as I said, we are thrilled this evening to be here with you, and the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas and the Interreligious Working Group on Extractive Industries are very, very pleased to welcome Robin Broad and John Kavanaugh here with us in order to discuss their new book, The Water Defenders: How Ordinary People Saved a Country from Corporate Greed. It came out last year, and the book has recently been named a best book of 2021 by the Progressive Magazine and Foreign Affairs, and it was just awarded Duke University's 2021 Juan Mendez Book Award for Human Rights in Latin America. Robin and John will discuss lessons from their book, where it tells the harrowing, inspiring saga of El Salvador's fight and historic victories to save their water and their communities from big gold. Based on over a decade of research and their own role as international allies of the community groups in El Salvador, Robin and John unspool this untold stories replete with corporate greed, unlikely Archbishop allies, a transnational lawsuit at a secretive World Bank tribunal in Washington, D.C., violent threats, murders, and surprisingly, victory. They will lead a conversation on lessons from this win for environmental defenders across Latin America in the wake of the historic elections in Honduras and Chile. Robin Broad and John Kavanaugh are a wife and husband team who've been involved in Salvadoran gold mining saga since 2009. Robin is an expert in international development and won a prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship for her work on this project. A professor of environmental and development at American University, she served as an international economist in the US Congress and at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. John has just transitioned to program work at the Institute for Policy Studies after serving for 21 years as director. He works closely with the Poor People's Campaign and other social movements. And just to add a couple of things, the Sisters of Mercy value so greatly the incredible work that both of you have done individually, personally, and professionally, and certainly place great credence of this. They also have years of work in the Philippines. I say it specifically naming since we know some of our sisters from the Philippines are with here and still have deep ties there. Their commitment to resourcing social movements is great and being accountable to those social movements. And they beautifully combine strong academic research with being in the streets themselves. So thank you both so much for spending your time with us, and to all who are here with us as participants. We look forward to you all also engaging and sharing your stories after the presentation from John and Robin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. That's a little overwhelming by way of an introduction. And I think I could spend I could get lost in the list of who is participating. Thank you so much. But to begin, I am speaking to you from the unceded land of the Piscataway peoples. I ask that you join me in acknowledging the Piscataway community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. Thank you. It's really an honor to be here with you all tonight. Special thanks to our co-hosts, the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas and the Interreligious Working Group on Extractivist Industries. Shout out to Marianne Comfort for her extra efforts in putting this event together, and to Jean Stoken and Scott Wright, with whom we have not only talked the talk, but also walked the walk over so many years. John and I couldn't be more humbled than by the presence of all of you at this event. So as John and I planned for our part of this event, we decided that the best way to introduce you to our book and to these issues was first to get you into the story in the same way that we got into it. Then to pull out some of the themes, lessons, and questions that we found ourselves grappling with as we wrote and reconstructed the more than 13 years of events, while of course leaving lots of time for your participation via testimony, via comments, or questions and answers. So to do that first part, to begin as we began in 2009, I'm going to read from the introduction to the Water Defenders for about 10 minutes. For nearly 2 weeks, Marcelo Rivera's family could not find him. Then on June 29, 2009, they received the phone call they had been dreading. The anonymous caller was brief. There was a body in an old abandoned well just west of the Romero hometown of San Isidro Cabañas. The well was near the spot where Marcelo had been last seen some 12 days earlier, getting off a bus at the turnoff to the capital city. During those 12 days, Marcelo's family and friends had been at wit's end, searching frantically, desperately for him. They had spread news of his disappearance in all the barrios of San Isidro and nearby towns. They had called the police for over a week, to no avail. The Rivera family had even filed a formal complaint with the country's attorney general, pleading with him to conduct a search and investigation into Marcelo's disappearance. But another poor person gone missing up in the rural north meant little to the authorities. After the anonymous tip to Marcelo's family, the police finally acted. They pulled the remains of a body out of the dry 30-meter well. So extensive was the torture that the body was unrecognizable. The face was grotesquely tortured. No jaw, no lips, no nose. The fingernails had been pulled off, the testicles bound. The trachea had been broken with a nylon cord. In the assessment of the coroner, death had been caused by asphyxiation. The public prosecutor disagreed, concluding that the death had come from blows to the head by a hammer. But whatever the cause of torture, it bore eerie similarity to that inflicted by the right-wing death squads during the 12 years of El Salvador's gruesome civil war, from 1980 to 1992. Thus, Marcelo Rivera became the first of several water defenders to be assassinated in the 21st century over mining in El Salvador. And though we never met Marcelo, we have been haunted by him and the circumstances of his death ever since. Who killed Marcelo and why? Perhaps you know the difference between a tortilla and a pupusa, or perhaps, like we had done, you are entering this story without a clue. Perhaps El Salvador is not even on your radar screen, or perhaps El Salvador is on your radar screen only because of the gangs or immigrants who trek north to the United States. But really, that doesn't matter. Certainly on one level, this is a story about El Salvador. At the same time, it is not just about El Salvador. This is a David versus Goliath story about a battle between a country and a foreign mining company. But it is also a story about how global corporations, be they big gold or big pharma or big tobacco or big oil or big banks, how they move into poorer countries all over the world. Marcelo's story, before and after his death, is about the struggle for clean and affordable water everywhere. It is also a story about workers and communities defending their air and their land, their health and their climate, and their rights to defend themselves against corporate incursion. It's a story about how to prioritize those rights and the common good versus the usual prioritization of the profits of big corporations and their owners. It is certainly a story about gold and when and why we should leave it in the ground, but it could also be about copper or coal or natural gas or other fossil fuels, or even about lithium, about whether we measure progress in aggregate financial terms or through the well-being of people and the planet, about who gets to make the decisions that affect our lives. To say that the story of the water defenders versus big gold holds keys to reversing the outsized power of global corporations today is not an exaggeration. You may find yourself surprised by the relevance of the strategy of the water defenders in El Salvador, whether your focus is on a gold mine in Argentina or the northern Philippines, a fracking company trying to expand in Texas or Pennsylvania, or a coal project in India. Along the way, however cliched the quote attributed to Margaret Mead may have become, you may also find yourself inspired by a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens who stand up to corporate power. We first heard of Marcelo Rivera in May 2009, just a month before his murder. He was a 37-year-old teacher who directed his hometown's cultural center, an avid reader, a person who loved theater and the arts, and a good practical joke. We heard his name
Robin, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you could slow down just a little bit for our
Sure.
interpreters to be able to make sure that we can
Absolutely.
catch everything. I'm very sorry to interrupt. I
No,
just want
you
to
should have
make sure
interrupted earlier.
that
It's
everyone
fine.
can catch you. So thank you very much.
We first heard of Marcelo in May 2009, just a month before his murder. He was a 37-year-old teacher who directed his hometown's cultural center, an avid reader, a person who loved theater and the arts, and a good practical joke. We heard his name because he was the leader of the main coalition of Salvadoran groups opposed to mining, the National Roundtable on Mining in El Salvador, or La Mesa. The Roundtable was not well known outside of El Salvador, but we learned of it because the group had been chosen to receive a prestigious human rights award from the Institute for Policy Studies, where John works. In 2009, the Institute selected the Roundtable to honor its opposition to mining companies eager to exploit the gold deposits near El Salvador's major river. On a misty night in October 2009, just months after Marcelo's body was pulled from that well, hundreds gathered at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., to meet and applaud the Salvadoran water defenders. Among them was Marcelo's youngest brother and best friend, Miguel. Miguel had come in his brother's place. Grief marked his face. Accepting the award on behalf of Miguel and 3 other La Mesa leaders was a peasant and community leader from the heart of gold country, Vidalina Morales. Vidalina looked small behind the podium. She at first appeared hesitant, nervous before the large audience, fragile even. Then she began to speak. Her words filled the auditorium almost as though she did not need a microphone. For nearly 20 minutes, Vidalina held the crowd spellbound as she relayed the saga of El Salvador's water defenders standing up to big gold. The Lempa River, she explained, winds through the country like a snake, providing water for over half the population. Water for drinking, for farming, for fishing. Water for the cities as well as the rural population. But the project of the Canadian headquartered Pacific Rim Mining Company at its proposed El Dorado site in Miguel and Marcelo's hometown posed serious threats to the Lempa River. Key among those dangers was the toxic cyanide that Pac Rim would use to separate the gold from the rock. Vidalina ended her acceptance speech with a seemingly audacious demand that the government of El Salvador stand up to giant mining firms and choose water over gold by banning the mining of all metals. All metals. Before this, she had urged the audience to follow a related legal thriller unfolding 4 blocks to the west of where we sat, just past the White House, to the site of a little-known tribunal in Washington, D.C. At that tribunal, Vidalina explained, Pac Rim had filed a lawsuit against the government of El Salvador right before Marcelo's murder. In that lawsuit, Pac Rim claimed that El Salvador had to either allow it to mine or to pay it over $300 million in costs and in foregone profits from future mining. Vidalina invoked the upside-down world summoned by Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano in asking why it was not El Salvador suing Pac Rim, since the mining company threatened the water and well-being of the country. But that upside-down world is the reality of global corporate power and economic rules that affect people around the globe. And as we, John and I, think back to that evening we must admit that we each, separately and silently, found it just as far-fetched to imagine a national legislature passing a law to end mining as it was to conceive of this World Bank tribunal siding with Vidalina and the rest of the water defenders. At the reception following the awards ceremony, we huddled with Marcelo's brother, Miguel. Miguel was soft-spoken and gentle in his manner, understandably a bit shy as he asked for help. After all, we had just met. Miguel seemed both incredibly focused on the details what to do next, and understandably shell-shocked by the chain of events, by his brother's murder and by the lawsuit. But Miguel's appeal was urgent, direct, and heartfelt. We don't know this tribunal or how it works. We don't know what to expect. Can you help us find out about this lawsuit? On that misty evening in October 2009, who could have guessed that Miguel's questions and Vidalina's call to action would pull us two and thousands of others around the globe, including, as John said, some of you here tonight, into the vortex of three interrelated unknowns for nearly a decade to come. First, there was the on-the-ground mystery. Who killed Marcelo Rivera and why? Not just who carried out the brutal killing, but who was the mastermind. Second, there was the mystery at the national level. Could El Salvador possibly become the first nation on earth to ban mining, or at least to move closer to that goal? Or did all the hoopla about stopping mining simply mean, as many assumed in 2009, that Pac Rim had not paid a high enough bribe to top officials in the Salvadoran government? And finally, the global legal thriller. Could little El Salvador possibly prevail against the global mining industry in Washington, D.C.? Would El Salvador, an economically poor country, even have enough money to pay for its legal and related costs? To hire a lawyer savvy enough to take on what would undoubtedly be a top corporate law firm hired by Pacific Rim? We had no idea then how these mysteries would play out. But as we joined the hundreds of people who streamed out of the National Press Club after the award ceremony, we knew we were hooked. We knew we needed to find out more about this tribunal, at least a day or two to research Miguel's answers. And we were intrigued Miguel's questions, and we were intrigued by the prospect, however unlikely, that a poor country might actually choose to take on big gold. Now, let me turn this to John, who will share more of our collaborative reflections on some of the big questions and lessons that this book and this work have raised for us. And then I'll return for some brief final reflections before we open this up to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robin, and thanks, Maggie and Marianne and all of you. It's a joy to spend part of this evening with you. And since I've had the great pleasure to work at the Institute for Policy Studies for almost 40 years, and I know some of you have been with the Sisters of Mercy for that amount of time, if not longer, and we've had a chance to overlap. I just want to thank you, Jean Stoken, who's here, others of you, for that journey and for the next chapter of that journey, because our hope is that this book and this conversation can help spur some future action. I also want to thank, we have a team at my institute that has worked on trade and mining, and it's led by Manuel Perez Rocha, a wonderful Mexican researcher activist, and he's joining us here tonight as well. Okay, picking up on where Robin left off, let me start with a spoiler alert here, but Maggie already hinted at it on the mystery. So first, yes, in March 2017, El Salvador did become the first nation on earth to ban all metals mining to save its rivers. And its legislature, imagine this, its legislature voted to do this in a unanimous vote. All political parties, left and right. Amazing. And secondly, 6 months earlier, in October 2016, this secretive World Bank tribunal that Robin mentioned voted unanimously against the mining company that sued El Salvador. Also amazing. 2 victories for the ages. So I hope you're wondering, how in the world did these 2 victories come about? And what might we learn for fights in other countries in Latin America, in the Philippines, in the United States, wherever you are, each of you are. So let me start by just stating some quick facts about mining. I know many of you work on mining, so excuse the next minute of this. What we learned in El Salvador is that all of these beautiful shiny things you're looking at in your room right now, from your computer to your vehicle outside, anything with metals, that the mining of those metals has 3 huge problems. One is environmental. It takes a huge amount of water to mine. Most minerals, when mined at an industrial scale, there's a use of toxic chemicals to extract the minerals. In the case of gold, it's cyanide. And once you smash up the rocks to get to the goodies, to the minerals, in about half of the mines in the world, you open up the earth that holds sulfides. And every time it rains, from then on, for hundreds of years, that turns into sulfuric acid, and it leaches other toxic minerals into the soil and water, from arsenic to iron, all things that cause damage. So one is environmental. Second is human rights. Mining companies bring huge amounts of money. Well, they keep most of the money from mining. They keep, in most cases, up to 98% of it. But 1% of the profits goes back into the community. It goes to the local governments. It's a huge amount of money in many small communities. That leads to greed, and it leads to violence against people who oppose mining. Just yesterday, 6 environmental defenders in Guapinol, Honduras, were found guilty of crimes against a mining company for their opposition to a huge iron oxide open pit mine near their community. And the mining companies do this all the time. They victimize, they demonize the opposition. Some are killed, some are put in jail. And finally, final problem, most minerals are in mountains. This is where most indigenous people in the world have been pushed. So a huge amount of mining is on indigenous lands. And these are 3 crushing realities that when mining companies tell you they're doing sustainable mining or green mining, they aren't. Can't be done. Some is worse than others, but this is a basic problem with mining. Okay, now to the question. I'll spend just a couple of minutes on 3 lessons that we drew from these victories that apply, we think, in many places. And then I'll end with just a few reflections on some interesting developments in Latin America, which are hopeful on this front, not just in El Salvador. So the lessons. One lesson is one that you all have helped teach me, which is that the key to victories is bottom-up power from communities, organized social movements on the ground. In this case, communities in northern El Salvador, those most dependent on this big river that Robin mentioned that goes through the country, they spent, when the mining companies came in, these people spent a huge amount of time studying about the impacts of mining. They went to Honduras, they learned from others, and they studied it and they became opposed. And then they used some of the most creative ways to educate the public. Marcelo was a genius at this. They used culture, marches, radio, forums, and they did this locally and then nationally and then with global allies. And the heart of this story and this book are these people, Vidalina, Marcelo, Miguel, and others. They're the key. So that's lesson number one. If you don't have that, you're unlikely to win. And I know most of you spend your life marching alongside social movements like these. Two, positive messages work better than negative messages. In this case, the water defenders focused on slogans like "water is life," "water, not gold." They didn't start with "we're against mining," which is more divisive and requires a lot of explanation. Their messages were positive, and that helped reach new audiences. And then finally, third, they built as many allies as possible. And now, many of these were what we would consider to be likely allies. They worked very closely, for example, with human rights groups, with environmental groups, with faith groups on the ground. And they also built those same alliances. Again, as I said, they first did this at the local level, but then at the national level. And then, as Robin described, they turned to the Institute for Policy Studies, researchers like Robin, and these same groups globally. So those are the likely allies. But in most countries now, here it's true, we're just on the edge of this in the US, but in most countries, you face opposition which is broad, deep, and well-financed. In the case of El Salvador, 2/3 of the national legislature were from conservative right-wing parties. So they knew they would not win unless they could win over some unlikely allies. So some of you know the history of El Salvador. Of course, all of you know Archbishop Romero, who then became a saint. My sense of the history of El Salvador is after he was killed, and he was killed at the beginning of this long, brutal civil war, more conservative circles in Rome said, we need more conservative archbishops. And there were 2 archbishops during this fight against mining. The first one was from Opus Dei. The second one was rather conservative. And the water defenders on the ground said, we need to try to win these guys over. And many of their people said, forget it. But they persisted. As Elizabeth Warren says, they persisted. And they kept pushing on the Opus Dei guy. He finally agreed to meet with them. They're getting nowhere in the meeting. You've all been in meetings where you're getting nowhere. And then they mentioned the use of cyanide to extract the gold from the rock. And this man, it turns out, had a degree in chemistry. And he said, why didn't you tell me about the cyanide? And he shifted to opposition, and he helped mobilize the church to stay in opposition. They reached across the political aisle to the right-wing party that had come out of the death squad side of the Civil War, and they won over a prominent legislator. They and we reached out to the lawyer of El Salvador who was educated at West Point and who was on the wrong side of that Civil War, who it turns out cared deeply about the environment. So there are several instances of this. It's a little bit akin to us reaching across the aisle to Mitch McConnell and saying, we need you to win this fight, and figuring out a way to get him on our side. But they did that. So those are 3 lessons from this fight that we think were key to victory. So finally, let me end with a few observations from Robin and Manuel and me that put El Salvador for a moment in the larger context of fascinating shifts going on in Latin America that many of you are part of. So first, while we were in this fight in El Salvador, social movements in several Latin American countries pressed governments to take action, and several put restrictions on mining. This is over the past 10 years. Costa Rica, no more open pit mining. Panama, restrictions on mining in southern indigenous areas. Argentina, bans on mining in 7 of their 21 provinces. Colombia, no mining in the highlands. So El Salvador is not alone. That was spreading. They were interacting, the water defenders in these countries, with one another. But then last year, it picks up. So in 2021, the first big election was Ecuador. One part of Ecuador, Cuenca, banned all mining around in its watersheds. And in that election, one of the top 3 candidates was an indigenous leader, Yaku Perez, who ran against mining. And he got 20% of the vote. That felt new. In Peru, last fall, a relatively new government picked a great environmental defender lawyer, Mirta Vasquez, as the prime minister. In Honduras, in November, after 12 years of a brutal dictatorship that expanded mining across the country, that nation overwhelmingly elected a progressive president, Xiomara Castro. Amazing to see that. In Chile, in December, former student leader, 35-year-old Gabriel Boric is elected president. And he announces that he will cut, they are one of the biggest producers of copper in the world. He'll cut copper mining. And he said he would nationalize the mining of lithium, a key mineral for batteries and electric cars. And then as we look forward to the months to come, you all know there will be big elections in Colombia, Brazil, and the leading candidates for president in both are critical of unrestricted mining. Gustavo Petro in Colombia, Lula in Brazil. Okay, so I brought you a lot of hope. My final word here is there's 2 caveats here that will make this hard. And you know it's all of this work is hard. It all takes struggle. One gets back to one of Robin's mysteries in El Salvador, which is, as more of these governments move to restrict mining under the rules that Robin described, mining companies will sue those governments. And we're going to have to fight to defend them. And we're going to have to fight, this is part of our work at IPS, to change those rules. And secondly, just to throw a difficulty in the midst of things, everyone here knows we need a massive transition from fossil fuels in our societies to so-called clean energy. But what we're all learning is that the clean energy alternatives, in this country, the US, for example, electric cars, will require more mining of key minerals. In that case, minerals like lithium, which is in Chile and Argentina, and nickel, which is in the Philippines, and cobalt. And so, in the name of saving the planet from climate change, there will be more mining unless we rethink that transition. So I'm leaving you here with some interesting questions. And before we open it up, I think Robin just wants to say one more thing. So back to you, Robin.
Thank you. So at this point, I was to add some final reflections and odds and ends, but John and I actually wanted to make sure to have plenty of time to hear from some of you and for discussion. So let me simply just wrap this up in a moment or two. And let me simply say that when we get to the questions and answers, we are happy to talk about any of this in more depth, including some of the things that have been raised in the chat. So we are happy to talk further about the investor state rules that allow global corporations to sue governments to try and stop corporate extractivism. We're happy to also talk about the lessons from South-North work from the Salvadoran wing, or at least we're happy to talk more about how we and others set up international allies to be a global coalition that worked with La Mesa, the national coalition in El Salvador. Given the audience, let me also add and let me announce that we are delighted to announce that a Philippine edition of this book is already out. So hooray to those of you in the Philippines. It's available through Ateneo de Manila Press, or some of you participating here may be a part of one of the anti-mining pro-water coalitions. They have books from us that they are distributing. And in addition, a Spanish language edition of the book is forthcoming. And we're really thrilled with that because we want the story of the water defenders of El Salvador to spread around the globe to give us all who are part of this movement even more power. But given the time and the expertise of so many of you in this audience, John and I are going to end here. And Marianne, I pass the baton to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Robin and John, for your solidarity with the people of El Salvador and for sharing the story with so many through your book and in your time with us. I'm Marianne Comfort. I'm also on the justice team for the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas, and I also chair the Interreligious Working Group on Extractive Industries. We know that we have many people with us this evening who are likewise accompanying communities that have been harmed by the extractivism development model and by companies engaging in mining, oil and gas exploration, construction of mega dams, and deforestation. So I'm going to invite a couple people to just very briefly share some examples of these struggles so that we can see how this plays out, not just in El Salvador, but in too many places around the world, and some places have not yet had the wonderful victories that we heard about here. So I'm going to invite Sister Ana Sufi of Argentina. Ana, if you want to unmute yourself and just share briefly your experience in Argentina and how that might connect to what Robin and John shared with us.
Buenas noches a todas y todos. Bueno, en primer lugar quiero agradecer de corazón a los dos expositores que explicaron tan bien lo que representa la minería para nuestros países, ¿no? Junto con otras formas de extractivismo. Y felicitar también al pueblo salvadoreño que logró prohibir la minería. En la Argentina estamos en un proceso inverso, porque si bien es cierto que tenemos en las provincias, muchas provincias donde se prohíbe la minería, hay un avance de la minería desde el gobierno, porque tenemos una deuda ilegal, pero que con el Fondo Monetario Internacional, pero que se va a pagar igual con los bienes comunes. Entonces avanza el fracking para el petróleo y el gas y avanza la minería. Donde hay leyes que la prohíben, se quiere cambiar esas leyes. Así que la verdad que hay una gran lucha del pueblo para frenar esta política de fomentar la minería. Nosotros lamentablemente tenemos litio, que eso significa, explotar el litio significa destruir grandes humedales, hacer un desastre social y ambiental. Bueno, están apostando al fracking, a la explotación del petróleo y el gas, y a la explotación de donde hay algún mineral para explotarlo, ¿no? Incluyendo el hidrógeno verde, y siempre inventan algo nuevo. Así que estamos en una gran lucha, desde las asambleas socioambientales que están en todas las provincias y en muchísimas ciudades, pero no es nada fácil, porque hay muchísimos intereses en juego, ¿no? Bueno, no quiero extenderme y quiero dejar lugar a otros. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ana. Very helpful to hear your experience. I want to next invite my colleague, Jean Stoken, who's also a member of our Mercy Justice team, to share about a case she's been following and the solidarity she's been providing to a community in Honduras.
Thank you, Marianne. And first, I just want to thank John and Robin, not just for this book, but for the accomplishment, the strategic importance of what you've done, but also your dedication, utter dedication to social movements. I could go on and on about these two people. I could go on and on, but just a deep bow of gratitude. John mentioned another case that's happening in Honduras of the Guapinal water protectors. There are 30 of them that were criminalized just for peaceful protesting, and 8 who have been in jail for 29 months. For those of us on the phone, on the Zoom from Mercy, we've had Sisters of Mercy in Honduras for over 60 years, Sisters and Associates, many of them who have been at the front lines of the social movements. And the election that just happened in June and the inauguration that happened 10 days ago of a progressive woman, first woman candidate, is a testament to the courage of people to be on those front lines. I mean, we get tired of go on a protest all the time, or we get tired of pushing those buttons to email our legislators. But the movements that risk their lives every day, and they know they're going to be killed. Berta Cáceres, the human indigenous leader who was killed in 2016, beautiful leader, indigenous, fighting for the land in Honduras. Scott and I worked with her for 15 years. So these are the way Robin started off with the martyrs and real people dying. And why the book is so compelling, because it puts that story in such a profound, who do we owe our credit to? So, and I'm struck, John, I didn't realize that it was in 2009 that Institute for Policy Studies gave the award to the water defenders in Salvador. 10 years later, 2019, IPS gave their annual Human Rights Award to the Guapinol water protectors. It's a broader group called the Tecoa Municipal Committee. And that started really the big campaign here in the US. So it's that same piece, what you helped see. So water protectors were given an award. Some of the members were already in jail. The other members were here. We hosted their families. Mercy with Manuel of IPS took them up on the Hill, got them in key Senate offices, get that case known. And it's been a hard, but I want to just connect those dots. The circumstances are different. It isn't a national law to ban mining. That was not possible under the last 12 years of a dictatorship. But it's a mining company owned by one of the richest families in the country, who is like this with a Supreme Court president who pushes down at the local justice courts to make sure these people are not let out. And yesterday, again, after lots of work, they were found, they were not let out. 2 of them were released, but 6 are still in jail. It was so blatant, the corruption. It's how do you mount a campaign against a particular mining company with tremendous power and resources, who actually, outside the IPS ceremony, the award ceremony, they were passing out information, a social media campaign to discount and muddy the name of the water protectors. Their families have continued to get threats. So the power of economic elites in a country, like Honduras. Now it's a new day, we have a new president, but the courts aren't in that realm, and death squads are still, active. It doesn't get pushed aside just with a second, but it is a chance. In similar to the water protectors, that book, and you have to get that book. It's the lessons learned. It's the strategic way that they orchestrated international solidarity and coordinated to have all these folks working at different angles. So. Again, it's Anna, Sister Anna, who was just on the Zoom giving the Argentina. She put her feet in the waters of Guapinol when we took a delegation down to lobby at the embassy to go to Guapinol to fight it. So it takes solidarity. It takes us going down, coming back. It takes animating the Hill. Yesterday's verdict was condemned by the UN, various offices of the UN, including the Human Rights Rapporteur, US Embassy silent so far. So we got to keep pushing on that. I thank all those, not only within Mercy, but in the interreligious working group on extractives who've been working on that case. So it's different, it's linked. We're still at it. Solidarity matters. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna and Jean, for presenting a couple of examples of the struggles. Robin and John, would you like to respond briefly to those cases, and then we'll go right into questions.
So first I have a question for Sister Anna. Where are you based in Argentina? Which province are you in?
Estoy en la Patagonia, en Río Negro. Estoy en una zona donde se está haciendo a pocos metros del río fracking. Es una vergüenza cómo se destruye, ¿no? Se destruye la fruticultura, y se la reemplaza por la explotación de petróleo y gas. También está avanzando la minería, pero el fracking ya está.
So I ask in part because we have been following the some of the events against mining, some of the resistance against mining in provinces like Chubut in Argentina, where I know the religious were a really important part of leading to mining being banned in Chubut. And so I want to toast people in Argentina, the water defenders in Argentina. 4 times the governor of Chubut has tried to pass a law, has tried to rescind the ban. 4 times the governor of Chubut. I have to be careful if I say something wrong because Sister Anne is the expert. But 4 times the governor has tried to let mining in, and 4 times, I've got goosebumps on all over as I say this, 4 times the people, including lots of nuns, have come out on the streets with such force that the governor and the legislature have had to back up and put the ban back in place. That's part of what I mean. That talk about social movement power.
Sí.
See, it must be, as Jean said, it must be pretty tiring to keep going out there, but it's incredible to think about the power that a governor or a president or a legislature in any country, be it El Salvador or Honduras or Argentina, thinks they have when they work with global corporations versus the countervailing power that can come in when social movements, and in this last case in Chubut, global allies around the world actually signed on to petitions that some people here had started to also let the governor of Chubut know that the world was watching and was there to act. So it's a pleasure to meet you. And Jean, I don't know. I mean, I could toast you and Scott.
Gracias.
Jean, I could
Es
toast
un
John and I could
ejemplo
toast you and
para el
Scott and all
resto del país, porque no todas las provincias tienen esa capacidad de lucha. Chubut ha sido pionera en el país y es un ejemplo, pero no todas las provincias tienen esa capacidad de lucha.
So maybe just quickly to add one thing here. I am so struck in all of this work. And this is where I think the Sisters of Mercy and many of you are so important. These fights take a long time. Jean just spoke of Honduras, where a government was overthrown in a coup, which unfortunately the US government implicitly supported 12 years ago. So 12 horrible years, and yet you never gave up. And now we have a government, and that's the first step. But still, as Jean explained, we still have more work to do to help the people in Guapinol. I feel this most personally, I just want to say, with respect to Chile, where there was a series of democratic governments, but a brutal military coup in 1973 that the US supported. And there was 17 years of brutal dictatorship. And then they crawled out of that with a plebiscite in 1990. And yet it's taken years and years and years to elect a government that now will stand up for the environment. And I would just say, an inspiring thing to watch this year is that in Chile, in addition to this new country, they have undertaken a huge national conversation in a constitutional convention to rethink the values of that society. Things like the rights of nature are being put forward in this convention, and they have not yet announced the date, when there will be a final presentation of this, but it will be a beautiful exercise in democracy and a reminder to us in this country that there's so much to learn from what creative people and movements around the world are doing. Now we should turn to your other questions. So Marianne.
Marianne, do you want us to answer the questions in the chat, or do you have more
Sure,
people?
that's great if you want to
Do you want
do
to
that.
let more people ask questions in
Yeah,
person?
why don't we just go right to the questions we have here? Why don't we start with John, you spoke of how those who receive economic benefits create division among the people. And the question is, how did folks handle that struggle?
Yeah. Oh my God. So unfortunately, in many countries in Latin America, the benefits are going to go to the local mayors. So that was the case here. And the mayors then hired, they're the ones who likely hired the hit squads that killed people. People reacted to that. They fought back in a couple of ways. One is that they simply organized more people to try to isolate those politicians. That's one thing they did. Secondly, they turned to the national government and the ombudsperson on human rights. Most of these countries have a human rights office, and they asked for protection. So they actually got protection. They were assigned guards. I mean, and I want to say one of the people killed there was in a car with his guards. So these guards can only do so much, but that's another thing they did. And then perhaps most importantly, they did what Jean just described. They also turned to international allies and said, can you publicize this? Can you put pressure on the US government to stop giving aid where it shouldn't go? There was brilliant work done on that around Honduras for the past 11 years. And right now, I just want to say a difficult twist in the Salvador story is that 2 years ago, they elected a Trump kind of president, a guy named Bukele, who is an authoritarian populist. And he has started to talk about thinking about mining again. And again, our allies are turning to us to denounce this and to shift US aid from giving money to the government directly to giving it instead to the groups on the ground, the humanitarian groups on the ground. So there's a lot that can be done to try to counter that, the power of that money. So that now, a final point, when Gabriel Boric says he's going to nationalize the lithium mines in Chile, what he's doing is taking out the profit of the private company that creates that conflict. So it will be fascinating to watch, one, if he can do that, and two, how that works. But that is one way, is to take those resources out of the hands of large private global companies.
Marianne, it's hard to follow all the questions in the chat, the answers that are be given in the chat. Thank people who, I lost the Zoom here. But let me try and put some of the questions about, can there be good mining, and what do we do about this so-called green transition that actually isn't so green? And so first of all, every mineral is mined differently. So but by and large, there is no mining that can be done environmentally and socially well. And so when John talked about the government of Chile nationalizing the mining, part of what The question is it, when a government nationalizes mining, it can either do the same old destructive mining, or it can try to figure out where mining can be done in remote areas that don't destroy watersheds. In the El Salvador, there's no place where mining can be done safely. It's a small country with 2 main watersheds. It may well be that in Chile, in some of the more remote areas, that it can be done. But we have to cut back on mining. We cannot have a transition to a real green transition if we do it by everyone selling their fossil fuel car and instead buying an electric car. The solution is not even 1 electric car per family, never mind 3 electric cars for family. Now that sounds pretty dismal, but it's actually, it's not, because the reality is that there are a lot of minerals. There are a lot of minerals that have been mined already. And what we need to do is really recycle way more. I don't have the data from every country, but in the United States, we recycle something like 20 to 30% of our minerals. If we increase that to 80 to 90%, then we can cut way back on mining. We actually don't need all the mining that's going on. What we need to do is reuse the minerals that we have. My late father was a metallurgical engineer. And in the last decade of his life, when John and I were working on this in El Salvador, I had some of the most interesting discussions with him about metals and what we need and what we don't need. And so gold is really important. We can't exist without gold. We're talking we can't have all the electronic we can't have this wonderful Zoom event without gold because of its properties. But there's lots of gold that's already been mined. Likewise, and Manuel already answered this in the chat, but maybe not everyone's following the chat. We have to have better public transportation. Countries in Europe do it, many countries in Europe do it much better than other countries, but everyone should be able to have affordable public transportation. The solution is not, we can't rely on private cars to get everywhere. I'm going to stop there, although as you can tell, I could keep going, but I think there's probably more questions. But let me just say that doesn't mean our lifestyles, I mean, if we think of lifestyles, our lifestyles don't have to change for the worse. Our lifestyles actually can change for the better. So I think we have to, but we want to make sure, we have to make the green transition not a brown-green transition, but a green-green transition. And as Sister Anna knows, we can't use all of Argentina's lithium. We can't do that.
Just one thing to add to that. Many of you who are based in the US have been pushing over the past year on the Biden administration to invest more in so-called infrastructure. And a bill was passed that, for example, does a very good thing. It will transform all of the lead pipes we have in the US that water goes through for about 10 million homes. It will transfer all of those to cleaner pipes. So there's some good things in there. But here's the problem with the priorities in it, along what Robin just said. There's 4 times more money to fix highways in that bill than there is for public transport. That should have been flipped the other way. There should have been 4 times more money for public transit than highways. Americans, people in this country love cars. And having lived in Europe, I lived in Switzerland for a while when I worked at the United Nations. Again, it's the opposite there. People have fantastic trains and trolley cars and buses, and the cities run on public transit, not cars. So it's a cultural shift, but as Robin said, it does not. I think that improves the quality of life in Europe. You spend more time with other people in public transit. And that's part of the change we need to undergo, in addition to the recycling.
That's great. Thank you both. I think that's a really good place to end with, is thinking about, you know, how this question of clean mining and a clean energy transition, and you know, how we need to be alert and pay attention to all of that. So that's very helpful, I think, to have the retrospective on the story of the water defenders in El Salvador, and to look ahead at what's coming with the need for more mining in alternative forms of energy if we are going to make that transition, and how do we make that balance. So I'd like to invite Sister Anya Connor of the Mercy Leadership Team and Sister Terry Bednars, who developed many of the resources that our Mercy community has been using to deepen our understanding of the harms of extractivism. And they're going to close our program.
Thanks, Marianne, and good evening, everyone, and a special good evening to John and to Robin. And on behalf of the Sisters of Mercy and the Interreligious Group on Extractive Industries, we really just want to say our real gratitude to you for the story that you have brought us into this evening, this morning for some, which is powerful, hopeful. It's a story of solidarity, and one that reminds us, and you did that very clearly, that justice and the road to justice is one that we take every day, and we will continue to take every day together. I have no doubt from this morning's presentation, that we can say, Marcelo Rivera presente. And we are most grateful to you, to Anna and to Jean. Thank you too for entering into the conversation. And as you're aware, we as Mercy are involved in an extractives conversation, seeing how extractives continues to impact people, communities, and earth. And no doubt the conversation this evening is radically instructive, including the response to questions, and that will further encircle us and engage us in the conversations that are ongoing and that we're having. But most of all, I love the definition that justice is, some say, love made public. And it's very clear that the work that you have been about, not only these years with the people and in solidarity with our sisters and brothers and Earth, that really you have given great witness to love made public and justice. And we thank you so much for that. And Terry?
Yes, we also want to recognize and appreciate the partnership of other faith groups who are participating with us in the Interreligious Working Group on Extractive Industries. And this group's broader efforts to educate about the harms of extractivism and advocate for communities here in the US and globally. Their efforts are extremely important. We welcome others to learn more and join these efforts. There are several resources that Marianne, I think Marianne, you're going to post these in the chat, that you can access to learn more about extractivism. One is the justresponse.faith, and the other is a web-based theological reflection process that we as Sisters of Mercy have been engaged in the last 5 months on the issue of extractivism. And there you can access a lot of the materials, the resources, which include videos and readings, articles, and a theological process. So Marianne, you'll either, I guess you have that in the chat and also perhaps by email. All right, thank you.
And I would want to say we really are grateful for each of you for participating this evening, this morning. It is just wonderful to look on the screen and see some gathered in rooms and across continents. And we couldn't have had our work this evening without our interpreters, and are so grateful to Ruby Castillo and Kathy Ogle, and to our Institute Justice team, who really coordinated the work with others, especially the logistics for the Zoom conversation this evening. Marianne, Maggie, would you like to add any more?
No, I think we just want to echo that debt of gratitude, both for your work, John and Robin, and for you sharing with us this evening, and for others who shared their stories and the work that we're all doing together.
And
so
we in turn are grateful and humbled for you all and the amazing work that you do. So thank you around the globe.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.
Stay safe and stay well.